Hi, I'm Sarah McCallum. I'm one of the virtual chapter leaders for Women for Kansas. And we're here with Paul Buskirk for our candidate forum. Tracy Mann was unable to attend. I think we have just a few announcements before we get going. Pam, did you want to start?
Sure. I just want to remind everybody that October 13th at 2 p.m., we're going to have Secretary of State Scott Schwab that'll be speaking. And we're really looking forward to that. So mark that on your calendars. I just confirmed it today. And of course, he'll be talking about our elections, and there's a lot going on right now. I bet he'll talk about the problem with the mail and that type of thing. So
It's not bubbling yet.
so anyway, sorry about that interruption there.
I apologize.
And let's see. Oh, I wanted to mention that Margaret Atwood, the author of The Handmaid's Tale, is at Kansas City tonight. And Google that and look for it, because she would be amazing to see in person. Anyway, I think that's all I've got.
Pam, can I just double check the date of our Scott Schwab meeting? October 8th, the Sunday?
No, October 13th. Did I say 8th?
No, you said 13th.
Yeah.
At 2 p.m.
Yeah, that was the only date he could do
Okay.
it. Yeah. So it won't be that first Sunday. It'll be the second Sunday, the 13th. Yeah,
Great.
we had to go when he had time.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. And then the only thing other thing that I wanted to mention before we got started, there is a sister organization for Women for Kansas. It's the Women for Kansas PAC, and they're raising funds currently to send out postcards to some districts where we had really good turnout in the primaries a couple of years ago when we had the amendment on the ballot, where we think we could really influence races for some of these more moderate candidates. And so those donations, I think we're still trying to get up to budget for the whole campaign we'd like to do. So visit the PAC website if you're interested in contributing to that. So we have with us Paul Buskirk. He's the Democratic candidate running against incumbent Representative Tracy Mann for the U.S. House 1st District. And I thought, first of all, Paul, if you would like to take a minute or two to just sort of give us a little background on your career and how you came to decide to be in this race.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us here this evening. Thanks to Sarah and for Pam for setting all this up. My apologies for my less than official office background here, as I shared with Sarah and with Pam. My younger daughter is doing an internship with the Disney College program down in Orlando for a few months. It's a great big deal for her. So right now, this is my only office space in the moment. So if you see some Disney things that have snuck in on the corners, then I love Disney too, but not to that extent. And I believe you'll have questions, and so I don't want to just drone on for minutes and minutes. So Sarah, per yours, a little bit about me. So I grew up in small town Nebraska. Holdridge was county seat of an ag community. And Dad was a preacher. Mom was a teacher. Sister became a nurse, and my brother became a doctor. My background is a little different, so I became an educator. And for the last 40 years, I've worked with primarily high school students, helping them get to college, and then college students, helping them finish their degrees and then begin their careers. And have just absolutely loved my interactions and have kept in contact with probably thousands of students along these days. My primary work had been at the University of Kansas for all this time. My reason for running is probably about 25 minutes long, so I won't give you that version at the moment unless you really have a slow evening. The abridged version would be this: is my parents raised me in very much in the notion of service. It was embedded in my upbringing. It was embedded in your upbringing. That's we give and we provide service to others. And I look at our elected and our appointed officials in Washington today, and I choose to believe, because I was raised that way, choose to believe that when these same officials began their careers that they too were committed to serving others. But now I observe Washington, and in many cases, I think something has changed. I see these same officials spending an abundance of their time. They're fussing and bickering with each other about their ideologies, about party affiliations. They are pointing fingers, they are placing blame and taking very little accountability, and we don't get much done. And it is really time for a difference, for opportunities for leadership to be able to remind ourselves is why government is there in the first place, which is there to serve those who sent them to office to help them meet the needs of the communities. That's why I'm running.
Great, thanks. And I have a few questions prepared that I'll start us out with. And then as we go, if everyone who's participating, if you have other questions that you'd like to clarify anything or hear from Paul on a different topic, please just go ahead and put those in the chat. And if you don't mind, let us know where you're writing in from when you do that. And I'll kind of read those out as we go. And then if we have time, we can do a little bit of Q&A at the end as well. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to ask about was what you see as the main priorities regarding the economy, and especially as it relates to your district, to more agricultural or rural areas and the priorities for the people in those areas.
We can walk a lot of different directions. We'll stick with two as that as a beginning point. So our district is massive. If you've seen the very creatively drawn district by our state legislature back in 22, we are 60 counties and 42,000 square miles. We reach as far as Lawrence, where I live, and not even the entire county of Douglas, just Lawrence. And then it reaches up and over Topeka, grabs Manhattan, Salina, down to Hutchinson, and then clear out to the Colorado border. And the diversity within our district is incredible and very special, and we could talk about that. Two particular issues on economy. One is very broad, one is specific and very narrow. On the broad sense, there are tremendous needs within our district that are common. And Tracy Mann is my opponent, and we can talk about him and his issues as we go. But he and I do agree on some things when it comes to our district, and that's a good thing. We should agree. The infrastructure is a tremendous need in the first district. That's the bridges, the roads, the water lines, the sewer pipes. Things are ages and 150 years old, and there's need for improvement there. The hospital and medical access really struggles. There's been some improvements in larger areas of population, but we are suffering in access to pediatric care in certain parts of our state. Our district members have to drive hours to be able to reach that. Teacher shortages, childcare. I mean, these are all economically related items. But I'd like to point out, and this will dovetail maybe into another question, but if that's okay, we'll kind of meld two things at the same time. The one issue that our friends on the Republican side are not talking about, it relates to immigration. And immigration, that the mantra that comes from both sides now is very common. It's, secure the border. Both sides now have grabbed a hold of that and said, great, we need to secure the border. That's great. What Republicans don't talk about running for office is Donald Trump has indicated on multiple occasions that when he reaches office, should he reach office, on his first day in the White House, he will sign orders that will mobilize the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the police, to identify, arrest, and deport every single undocumented resident in our country. That is tens of millions of individuals. The official count in Kansas, the official count of undocumented residents is 62,000, which means the numbers are probably at least double that. So not only would such an action be heinous in its regard, it would rip families apart needlessly. But what the Republicans don't want to talk about is that the economic impact to Kansas, and specifically the first district, and even more specific, the southwest portion of our district, would be massive. Agriculture and the meatpacking industries and the feed, everything surrounding that is very much embedded in labor. And whether deportation impacts those exact workers or their families, the impact will be immediate. It'll be labor shortages. It'll be very similar to COVID. The price of beef will skyrocket at the market. The price of feed cattle at the auction block will drop. The price of feed corn, which is already going to be depressed because we have a massive crop that's being harvested right now, will further be depressed. Numbers that sound like recession now will sound and look like depression in the future. The economic impact could be disastrous.
Thank you. I think there, we want to, where we can, just give what Representative Mann's candidacy, what his positions are on his website, since we don't have him here in person. So he has two topics that relate to what we just talked about. One is rural revitalization. And as he said, Paul, he says the Big First is one of the most rural districts in the country. Our way of life is not understood by all, but believe it to be the heartbeat of America. And the issue he focuses on here is for communities to not just survive, but thrive. Access to rural broadband throughout the district is critical. And then the second issue we really touched on there was strong border security, which his position is we must secure our southern border by constructing a wall. This is a national security issue, a human trafficking issue, a drug trafficking issue, and just makes common sense. So moving on to a topic that you sort of mentioned in your first response, which was access to healthcare and the hospital access issues that are pretty common in rural Kansas. There are a lot of other issues with access to healthcare in terms of Americans who don't have access to good health insurance, and also women's access to reproductive rights, which I realize makes this a really broad umbrella topic. But I wondered what you think the priorities are in terms of practical ways to expand healthcare coverage for Americans. And then maybe we take this separately, but in terms of the way that reproductive rights have been limited, there's some talk of, do we codify what was in Roe versus Wade as a federal protection, and what your thoughts are on that point, if that's something you would agree with?
Well, you're right. We're melding several things, but that's all good. I love the conversation. So let's jump in on reproductive rights first. And again, not speaking for Mr. Mann, but his website will say the very same thing. Mr. Mann says that if he could do things his way, he would completely ban access to abortion across the country with no exceptions, period. That's it. He and I are polar opposites on this. I believe in and will work to protect the freedom of all human beings to manage their own health care and their own reproductive rights without government interference, period. Government has no place in these discussions or considerations, and the opportunity to actually place this into federal law, absolutely would vote for that without hesitation. That is necessary for us to be able to move forward as families and a nation, and I believe that firmly. I'll pause for a second. We can move to healthcare, which is parallel. So healthcare, I hear this a lot. So I mentioned our district, and someone had asked earlier before we began, am I out in the district? So yes, that's a definite. I have put about 19,000 miles on the car since February, and we've got another 6 to 8 to go. I had hoped to be able to be in all 60 counties of our district before we get to the election. I have to share with this group tonight that I'm not going to make it. I wish I could. There's just parts of our district that really have so few people in those. That doesn't make them less important, but I have to be able to also do my best to spread the word as best I possibly can. The couple of major legislations that President Biden actually enacted in the past 2 years, we've actually been able to expand some areas of healthcare and some clinics, and there's some new facilities in parts of our district which are just amazing. and unusual, but they're also very few in the process. And then I hear this, and maybe you hear this as well. There's this very convenient answer, whether we're a federal candidate or whether we're maybe a state candidate, state senate or state house, is, oh, that's a federal issue, so I don't have to talk about it, or that's a state issue, so I don't have to talk about it. I have made a point in my visits across these counties to specifically reach out and ask medical professionals, whether it was a doctor, nurse, physician's assistant, somebody involved in those visits, what they think about Medicaid expansion. 100% of the responses from these individuals has been, yes, please expand Medicaid. The benefits to our states and to our communities would be amazing, and immediately responded. So when I hear some state or leaders in state house and state senate indicating that they've talked with medical professionals that disagree with that, I don't know who they're talking to in that moment. And the federal candidates cannot remain silent. It's us. It's the same district. It's the same Kansans. It's the same individuals that are struggling for help. And one thing that the state legislatures are not ready for, and let's presume with a half full glass that I'm actually victorious on November 5th. I'm going to be coming and visiting the state legislature come the springtime. I'll be back, and because this is so important for us, and maybe I'm not welcome and don't want to be heard, but using a bully pulpit to be able to say and call people out when they claim that they're the voice of the people, and I know they're not. We're going to talk about that very openly, and maybe on the steps of the Capitol in Topeka.
And do you do you have thoughts on sort of the position that we should return rights on reproductive care, at least, to the states and allow that to be the final decision maker versus the federal government taking some definitive action to protect those rights?
Well, Mr. Trump is between rock and the hard place, so he's getting out of, or trying to get out of, the criticism by saying leave it up to the states and they'll take care of it in that way. We've been watching what's happened since Roe was overturned. We've been watching in a few states where states have cracked down and not allowed access to abortions, even in critical health related and life related issues. And so to be able to leave it to a state is abdicating responsibility where we need leadership. And just as it is so fun to reminisce on August 2nd of 2022. And I must share with you, I'll be I'm always straightforward, open book. This is my second run for office. My first run was 22. I did a very brief run for US Senate in 2022. I filed right before the deadline in early June. And the reason I chose to do so was because that is when the media leaked the information about overturning Roe with the Dobbs case. And I turned to my bride of 32 years and I said, if not now, when? And she said, go do this thing. And so I'm crisscrossing the state as best I could, not as much as I'm doing now. If you had asked me before the August 2nd vote what my sense was on how the actual vote would turn out, only by me gauging how many signs I saw that said one direction or the other, I would have told you that it would have passed by 15 points. So to be able to emerge from that amazing stance of freedom and said, no, we will not be silent, and to have Kansas be the voice of a nation, that was the most amazing 24 hours I think most of us had ever, and we'll remember that for a lifetime. That was spectacular.
Yeah, absolutely. And since we are sort of reading some of Representative Mann's position, since he was unable to be with us this evening, I did want to read his stated position on reproductive rights. He says he believes that life begins at conception and will fight to protect the innocent life of the unborn. He will be unwavering in supporting pro-life legislation and will oppose taxpayer funding of abortions. I also wanted to ask, And for those of you who have maybe joined after we started, if you at any point have questions to add, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we may have some time for some verbal Q&A at the end, but any questions that come up as we go, put them in the chat and I'll read those out. I also wanted to ask about education funding. I know at a state level, education funding has been sort of a fraught issue in Kansas. And then, at the federal level, there are certainly some sentiments, at least in the Project 2025 literature, about the direction that party could go in terms of making funding conditional for public education and lowering the funding for public education strategically. And so do you have any priorities or concrete thoughts on, how we make sure that we have the funding that we need for education for K through 12 and getting to the states, getting to your constituents in Kansas?
I've read a good portion of the Project 2025. I will admit that I have not been into the fine print when it comes to attitudes and mandates on education. Something that we all deal with is a wish list of things to meet the needs that are in front of us. And funding for this and funding for that, there is a tendency, and I do the same thing. Well, goodness, we're short funds on this. And so we look to the federal government. You need to solve our issues with this. And federal government, God bless them, has a tendency to issue an abundance of edicts without necessarily funding how we get to those edicts. And that is irresponsible representation. Either don't tell us what to do, in which case we won't look for your dollars, or if you insist that we do some things, then let's work together to be able to fill that. And as you indicated here, Sarah, certainly the state funding, and I'm proud of the state of Kansas for getting closer on special education. That was towards the tail end of the session, and that's not a one-off. Once we establish that threshold, you got to keep going in that direction. But as someone who's been in higher education for 38 years, that's where I live and breathe and love. And if our students are not raised and given the opportunity to be able to learn how to represent themselves, to communicate, to be able to engage with one another, then thriving in our communities really becomes a challenge. And you didn't ask me, but since we're on education, if anyone asks, do we need to use public dollars to be able to create vouchers to send students to private schools? The answer is no. That doesn't make any sense. That makes no sense. That doesn't create the guarantee of an accessible education for all of our kids in K through 12.
Okay, thanks. And Representative Mann has no, as far as I can tell from his Man for Congress website, no stated position on education funding. So I also wanted to ask you about sort of the divisive nature of politics, and there's no guarantee that we'll have a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House, a Democratic president. There may be a real need to reach across party lines, and that sort of seems like a lost art sometimes, at least at the federal level. And so what are your thoughts on how important it is to reach across the aisle, and also how you would do that, and any relationships that you might be thinking about forming to help you be someone who works across the aisle if you think that's a priority?
Thank you. So 2 parts in this one. First is where I've come from, and I'm not sure if I articulated, but the niche within the higher education that I've worked all these years has been within higher education and athletics. And so I say that mostly any preconceptions that maybe you have about how head coaches at the highest level, the most visible level, maybe have egos and priorities and such. Any myths that you have are largely based in fact. And so I share that. I have an abundance of experience on working with people that do not want to get along with each other, but being able to say, all right, how do we find a way to be able to get together to serve the purpose, in this case, of working with a student to get them where they need to be and get the resources. So I share that with you. I'm not opposed nor do I shy away from conflict, but I don't think we need to start with conflict either. So if I may, I'll tell you a story, and I'm careful about storytelling because my dear bride of 32 years, if she were standing right here behind me, you might see a gentle hand on the shoulder, because the storytelling is getting a little too far. So Sarah, if I go too far down the bunny hole, I'll kind of do this, right? So
Look at you. Yeah.
The story takes me to Dodge City on 2 occasions. I've been there like 4 different times. The first time is back in February, and I'm visiting with some good folks, and the political reporter for the Dodge City Globe, his name is Andrew Evans, comes up, and we're having a great conversation for a few minutes. And he said, well, Paul, let's assume you're in office. You're in office, and said, what's your 100-day plan? And I hadn't heard that one before. And I turned to him, I said, Andrew, you understand, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing in the next 10 days. And you're asking me what happens 100 days from January? So, but it got me thinking quite a bit about that. And then when I saw him a few months later, I said, Andrew, I have an answer to your question. He forgot what question he'd asked me, but that's okay. My plan, let's just say that I am the first Democrat in 70 years that now wins the 1st district. That's how long it's been. So the Congress is 435 members. And just as you indicated, Sarah, the likelihood that it's going to be a large margin one direction or the other is not good. It's going to be razor thin, whether it's Republican or Democrats. So if we don't find ways to reach out and work together, we'll be in the same stalemate, which is where I began my conversation with you tonight, and the frustrations that we have about getting nothing done. 435 members of the House means there's 434 individuals I've never met before other than Sharice Davids. It may take longer than 100 days, but I will go and ask to visit with every single one of those individuals, whether it's in their office, whether it's taking out to breakfast, going to coffee. We have to be able to get acquainted. I need to understand who they are, their priorities, their journeys. I need to hear from them about the needs of their constituencies. Hopefully they'll be willing to ask me a little bit about my journey and about the needs of our constituencies. Because if we don't have that conversation, and the first time we're ever meeting is on the floor, and there's some type of a battle of 200 and something this and 200 and something that, we'll be back where we started. We have to be able to reach out and be able to understand. So I shared that with Andrew, the political reporter. He said, Paul, he's very opinionated. For a journalist, that's I get used to that. That's good. He said, it's a matter of leadership. I said, Andrew, what do you mean by that? He said, it's going to be a razor thin either way. He said, but imagine this. And now he's thinking for me at this process. Imagine this. You're now in a close vote in the House. He said, and your Democratic caucus leaders tell you, Paul, you're a member of our party, you're going to vote this way because that's the party line. Again, if I'm the first Democrat in 70 years that is winning the 1st district, that is headline news across the country. The bully pulpit opportunity to do what's right and not to do what is PC is amazing. He said, I could be in a situation where the vote is this thin and I balk my party and vote the conscience of my district in that vote. And that vote might lose, but who knows? There might be 3 or 7 other individuals in that chamber that day that have been itching to be able to do the very same thing, but they've been scared to do so. So it is a vision and action of leadership to be able to say, we have to move forward to serve the people. That's what government is all about. And if we don't work together, there's no point.
Okay. We also, I also wanted to ask you just a little bit tonight about gun violence and the Second Amendment, and if you could really just tell us what kinds of restrictions, if any, or controls you believe would make sense to sort of address the epidemic of gun violence and mass shootings that we see, and where you stand on that issue.
So we become historians, right? And I'm not a student of history, but I love hearing about it. And our founders signed the Constitution in 1787, and they started to try and sell it to these 13 unruly colonies at the time, and the colonists pushed back and they said, we just threw our shackles away from these despots in England, and now how do we know for sure that you're not going to do the same thing to us? So this, I'm preaching to the choir here. So they go back and they craft this Bill of Rights, right? The first 10 amendments, and this is number 2 in the process. Now, the founders are doing something in 1787 that no one had ever done before. And they're doing the best they can to believe that what they're setting in motion would be able to carry forward and persist over the course of time. I'd like to believe, and I do believe, the founders also would understand that our cultures would evolve, our thinking process would evolve, our technology would evolve. The gun of choice in 1787 was a long gun. I can't reach on the camera long enough. It's about 3 feet long, and it was nicknamed the Brown Bessie. It was used by the British and by the US. It was a single shot gun. I read through this. You can go look it up. Single shot gun. The most skilled of marksmen in battle maybe could reload and fire 3 times a minute. 3 times a minute. So that's what the founders' context was when they said the Second Amendment is something important to our electorate. I choose to believe the founders would think that common sense has got to be involved in this process, that it would make common sense that you would have to apply for a permit to be able to use something that could harm someone else. It would make common sense that you would lock your guns up away and keep them away from children. It would make common sense to have a waiting period when we go to apply for a gun and a weapon so we can check into the background. It would make common sense to make sure that we would never allow someone who might be willing to harm themselves or others to ever have access to a gun. It would make sense that we would never allow guns in the hands of someone who would be abusing their partners in the process. There's just the common sense. And the founders, remember, 3 times a minute on a single shot gun. What they would say today about an AK-47 that shoots hundreds of rounds a minute makes no sense. So guns are here to stay. The Second Amendment is not going away, but we have the obligation to be able to use the common sense and craft security around our communities the best we can. Given the opportunity to reinstate the restrictions on the assault rifles, I would do that in a heartbeat.
Okay. And Representative Mann does have a stated position on guns on his candidate website, which is the right to bear arms is fundamental to our Bill of Rights and is part of the bedrock of what makes America exceptional in the world. He's a proud NRA member and will stand up against efforts to diminish or weaken the rights of law-abiding Americans to own, carry, and use firearms. So I also wanted to ask you about, this is kind of a newer topic. Obviously, the composition of the US Supreme Court has changed and made some significant waves and some significant decisions over the last couple of years. And recently, President Biden introduced some thoughts about changing the composition and term limits of the Supreme Court. Which I know is sort of a new idea. I'm not sure we've really considered that seriously as a country in quite a while, and wondered what your thoughts were on that and whether that would be good for our democracy.
2 thoughts parallel, Sarah. I'm debating as to which one is first. A thought, not necessarily President Biden's specific recommendation, a thought had been to pack the court, to have then, because there's nothing in the Constitution that says you have to have 9 members. That's just how things were set up. And I'm not in favor of that, because as soon as one party is in control of power and makes it 11, then the next time we switch and somebody else is in control, and now it's 13, and then it's 15, and then it's 19, and the precedent set there would just be horrendous. Term limits are an interesting thing, and again, that's not in the Constitution for the courts. And the historians in the Zoom session was supposed to give the Supreme Court the latitude so that they wouldn't be influenced by individuals, they'd have the latitude to use their collective wisdom involved. We've seen some changes in that. In general, I think I'm fumbling here, so I'm going in different ways, but you'll pull me back into rein here. I disagree with term limits for elected officials. I mean, the president obviously is two-term, and here's why. There's an amazing document which many of you maybe know much better than I do, the Federalist Papers. So this is a collection of, I think it's 82 essays that were written by Alexander Hamilton and John Jay and, oh dear, a third person. This was, again, after the Constitution was signed, but not yet ratified. And once again, the colonies were kind of pushing back. We're not so sure we like this thing or not. So these individual writers wrote these series of essays, and they published those in various New York newspapers under pseudonyms. They're trying to persuade the electorate, this is what we need to do to be able to move this forward and adopt this Constitution. And they didn't specifically say no term limits, but they made it very clear that the one thing that's powerful to hold an elected official accountable is them being held up for re-election. Right? So if we have an individual that they've won a first term and there's a term limit now, and now they're elected for a second term and they're going to be there for 3 or 4 years, there is zero accountability from the electorate. They can do whatever they want, and there is, other than breaking laws and having the House or Senate censure them, things like that. So I will tell you that I'm really on the fence about a term limit, although I think that what you said and what I've read was 18 years. Does that sound right, that President Biden's recommendation?
Yeah, I think so. And then they would appoint every so many years. So it seems like those 18 years would really alternate. You would have,
Yeah.
Not a number of justices going out at the same time, but sort of a regular turnover.
As you can tell, I'm still working on this one. I don't
No,
know.
it's kind of a complicated plan.
It really is. It really is. And accountability for the court is what seems to be missing. And is that the best way to be able to enforce it? Maybe not. But status quo is not proving itself historically to be in our best interest as a country.
Yeah. Seems like we've had more maybe strategic resignations and based on who's in power than we ever had before. So that's different.
Very much so.
Okay, I know that you've talked a little bit about sort of access to healthcare within the district where you're running, and some economic factors that impact them. But I kind of wanted to ask you if you think that there's an issue within this district that's being overlooked, that people aren't talking about, that maybe you're seeing or hearing about, that's not making the commercials, not being discussed enough.
Yeah. Thank you. That opens up a door where I was hoping we could talk a little bit. As I mentioned, Mr. Mann and I've met him. I'm not challenging him as his character and such, but I challenge his decision making. We do agree on lots of things. There are at least 3 things that we are opposed. I mentioned that. The one is certainly the reproductive rights, and so we've talked about that. The 2 others, and one may seem like a niche, but a niche that's very, very important. So Mr. Mann back in April voted against U.S. action to provide money and weapons to Ukraine. He voted against that. I fully support that. And here's why. As soon as that vote happened, I received several phone calls from retired military individuals who were just aghast that anybody would vote against aid to Ukraine in its current circumstance. And they cited historical elements and the fact that from their perspectives, and again, these are retired folks that currently enlisted and serving military are not supposed to talk politics. They're supposed to just do their jobs. And I respect that. So as I thought, and I've read a great deal more about this, and then I was informed that, and we know that right outside of Manhattan in Riley County is Fort Riley. And Fort Riley is the home of the 1st Infantry Division. It is the largest such division of the Army in our entire country. the individuals stationed at Fort Riley are about 20,000 soldiers, and then their family. It makes it about the sixth largest city in our state all by itself. And then I was informed here a couple of months ago, it's not a big secret apparently, that individuals who are stationed at Fort Riley are soldiers, are currently assigned in Western Europe as part of the supply chain management system, where weapons coming from the US are then channeled through Western Europe to be able to get to Ukraine. Should, God forbid, that escalation happens in Ukraine and soldiers would be closer to the actual the hostilities involved there, God forbid that happens, it's going to be soldiers related to the 1st Infantry Division in Kansas that will be part of that effort. And so to ignore that issue is to ignore a fabulous and amazing and very much needed element and partnership of our community. So that's one thing that kind of goes under the radar. The one that has been the most eye-opening for me in these journeys and conversations takes us back to immigration, but it's slightly related to, but not quite, right? So, and if I'm preaching to the choir, you know all this, then, you know, Sarah gave me this thing here. So the makeup of our communities in Southwest Kansas is amazing. We talk about diversity in a variety of different ways, but our district, again, so diverse in geography. We're diverse in education, industry, culture, background, languages. But the industry in the Southwest Kansas is agriculture through and through, as it is in a great part of our 1st district. But in particular is what happened when the meatpacking plants, there are 2 in Dodge City, 1 in Garden and 1 in Liberal, located into that triangle area many years ago. And that drew laborers because it's a tremendously labor intensive effort. And so the ethnic makeup of those communities in all 3 of those, you know, I just shared with someone earlier, I was in Liberal, Kansas for the 2nd time 2 weekends ago. Those communities are about 65% non-white, Hispanic, but also international. In fact, I was told in Dodge City last year in the K through 12 school system, in Dodge City last year, there were 85 distinct languages being spoken in the schools in K through 12. How we teach someone when the languages are there, but they make it work. So my story, it's so compelling to me. I don't know if it will be for you. So when I go to Dodge, I mentioned this back in February, and I'm visiting with a colleague who was showing me around, and her name is Greta Clark. I think I can use the name because she is the chairperson of the Democratic Party in Ford County, to Dodge City. And she and I are getting acquainted, and her background is she taught English as a 2nd language in the K through 12 system in Dodge City for years and years. When she stepped away from that, she taught English 2nd language at the community college for some years, and now she's officially retired. So we're visiting, and she said, well, Paul, when the shift changes, I'd like you to come visit with one of my classes. And I said, well, I thought you were retired. She said, well, I am, but I work for the union that represents the workers at the meatpacking plants in Dodge City. It's called the United Food and Commercial Workers. And in Dodge City, which is, again, there's 2 meatpacking plants there, Cargill and National. Together, they employ about 6,000 individuals. They process 12,000 head of cattle a day in those meatpacking plants. These are massive operations. So the union actually has a small community center. It's basically a Quonset hut. And she said, well, I'm there and I teach classes. I'd like you to come to the class. And I said, Greta, I don't know how I help in your teaching English as a 2nd language. She said, no, that's a different class. I said, okay, well, what class is this? She said, well, the union firmly believes in helping their union members gain citizenship if they're not already citizens. And when you go through the citizenship process, there's a fee. It's about $700. The union, once someone and their membership gains citizenship, then the union will reimburse them the $700. I said, great. So I'm coming to your class where they're learning citizenship. She said, no, that's a different class. I said, well, what class am I coming to? She said, your class, my class that you're coming to at 5:30 are individuals who've already earned their citizenship, but they're coming to continue to learn about what engaging as a U.S. citizen really means and what that political process means. I said, I'm in. I'd love to be there. So 5:30, the shift changed. I show up. There's about 14 individuals, ranges from 25 to 45. They're tired. They've been working all day. Their English was a whole lot better than my non-existent Spanish. So, but they were very kind, and they asked amazing questions about the political process. They'd never seen a candidate before. I walked out of that after 20 minutes, firmly believing that those 14 individuals knew more about the Constitution than 98% of most people I would encounter out on any street in our district. And it was a proud, proud, proud moment, because we talk about immigration, and here's Donald Trump, who is criminalizing these individuals. These are first, second, sometimes third and fourth generation individuals that want to make a living. They have made a living here. And for us to demonize these individuals as though they don't belong, in many cases, they belong so much more than other individuals who have not learned and have not worked as hard as they have.
That's a great story. I have, I guess I have one clarification, and then I could do one more question, or as we're sort of getting to the end of the hour, if other people would like to ask anything or follow up on anything, please use the raise your hand or just wave at us. At the sort of beginning of your discussion about Fort Riley and support for the war in Ukraine, I just want to make sure I was clear. You do support funding to aid Ukraine?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood the beginning of that story. And then unless anyone else wants to jump in, I sort of wondered what you thought about, we've now seen a bit of a preview from Vice President Harris about things that she would do to address the economy, which keeps coming up as the #1 issue. And so one in particular is tax credits to help small businesses start. I think it's a $50,000 tax credit. And I think another was trying to address price gouging. And I'm not sure we know all of the details of those things, but these are her concepts that she's put out. And so I wondered if you had any thoughts on whether those proposals would be helpful to the constituents in this district.
I'm the least qualified person in our conversation to be able to speak on the nuances of economy and whether this lever does this or this lever does this. So I'll defer to the people much smarter than I am. I think as the new candidate, she is reaching to try and make sure that she can say, yes, I know. And if she were to call me, and if anybody have your number, then please ask her. I'd love the conversation. I share with you and again, 60 counties, 42,000 square miles. I don't meet everybody, so my sample sizes are relatively low. But I can share with you what I saw as night and day changes in the feel in many of our communities after Harris got the nomination. It was this infusion of excitement and hope from many, and not just women. No, not just women, but oh my goodness, there might be a path to be able to not have our nation suffered with leadership from Mr. Trump, which I think we're just all have tremendous concerns about this. And it continues to gain momentum. I just got an email yesterday, so I'll tell you that one by telling you the other one. So in the Kansas Democratic Party, we have 105 counties, right? And in the first district, that's the same 60. There's only 26 counties that have technically organized Democratic Party affiliations in those counties. And I can share with you, sometimes the word organized is a bit of a stretch, right? There's a lot of red territory in the first district, and that's who we are. I got a note, it was about 6-8 weeks ago. I got a note from a fellow named Mark Shalkowicz, who is the Democratic chairperson in Rooks County. So think Hayes and go straight north 1 county. And he said, our colleagues in Norton County, so think Rooks County, go up 1 more and then go to the Nebraska border and over further west, that Norton was going to organize its Democratic Party. And could I be there? Could I be there when they do that? That absolutely yes. I say yes to everything. So that was a 4-hour drive to get to Norton County. The entire population of Norton County, entire population of the county, 5,300. And we're in the city of Norton, which is probably about 900 individuals. And we're gathered at the American Legion building. And I walk in and there's 45 people in this room. And here's Mark Shakowicz, who's walking this group through the nuances, because you have to be able to do this and nominate this person and take on this role to make sure it's all kosher, and went through that whole process. But they were so excited about the notion of it was like the birth of an idea. And this is in the wake of Kamala being involved in the energy there. I get an email 2 days ago from the same fellow, Mark, and he said, we have another county that is going to organize in a few weeks. Can you be there? It's like, you could look in the history of the Kansas Democratic Party, when 2 counties organized in the same year, you will not find it. So there is clearly a wave of energy that is flowing through our very own state. And it's okay for Kansas to be first, right? Because sometimes Kansas is actually right.
Absolutely. Pam has her hand up.
Yeah, Paul, I've got a question, and it's about climate change. We've talked about the economy, we've talked about immigration, and right now, the world is going through one of the largest migrations of people that we've seen in hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And it's due to flooding, desertification. And so climate change is at the base of that. So I have a couple of questions for you. One is, do you accept that climate change is caused by human interference? And the second part of that would be, what further measures do you think this country can take to mitigate climate change?
Great questions, Pam. Easy one. Number one, yes, absolutely. This is human. I mean, science tells us that. That shouldn't be that difficult, but some folks have a hard time accepting. Nationwide, I'm not smart enough to be able to talk about that necessarily, but I can talk about our own district. And there is a perception from some folks who are not farmers and not producers and not ranchers, that perhaps that those folks, farmers, ranchers, producers, don't understand that climate change is there and that they don't need to adjust in their practices to be able to help us preserve the climate and preserve our earth. And my experience is sometimes that's true. There's some very stubborn individuals. My great grandparents did things this way, and by golly, we're going to till that earth and plant that. But some other folks really have jumped into the science in water, the Ogallala Aquifer, and that covers not just Kansas, but about 6 different states. If we ignore that, we're going to perish from it. We're not there in that part of the state, but there are individuals in our district that are willing to embrace that. So sometimes it's a cognitive dissonance. I know that, because here I am, a rancher, and maybe I am diehard red and I vote this direction, but I also know if I want my grandchildren to take over this ranch in another 40 years, I have to evolve and change in the process. So there is room for education and growth. And I really believe that that's care, but we can't do that by fighting, right? We can't do that by saying, well, that's your fault and your fault. We have to be able to do this by saying we're all here for our grandkids. And I want to help you help us in that process. And I think there's tremendous hope. I really do.
Thank you so much. Do we have, I mean, it's almost 8, but does anyone have a question or a follow-up? I don't have any other questions in the chat right now. So if anyone has a question, I think go ahead and kind of pipe up. Oh, Kelly Wall.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
My question is, it's too bad that we don't have both candidates present at this forum. And I know when you were in Lawrence and we did a forum here, we were not able to have Terry Mann present. I'm wondering, is he attending any forums? Are you able to have face-to-face conversations with him at all in any of the counties around the big first congressional district, or is he just avoiding forums in general?
It's more that second than the first. But to be specific, very kind to host the Douglas County Forum. And as you shared with me, he declined to be a part of that. the Reno County Women for Kansas chapter did one a week ago Monday. I have to think of a calendar in my head about, yeah, a week ago yesterday. They invited Mr. Mann. He never responded to that one. There was a smaller forum in Salina the next day, a week ago this evening, and anyone from his office was offered a chance to attend, and no one attended. And then Pam and Sarah have indicated that they reached out to Mr. Mann and he was not available. And then 3 weeks ago, these are all facts. So 3 weeks ago, back to back, I get two phone calls. One was from WIBW TV in Topeka. We're asking if I would be willing to do an on-air debate in October in a particular program. And as I told you, I said yes to everything. And so that was an outreach. And then the very same day, I get a note from Sarah Wassinger, who's the president of the Hayes Chamber of Commerce. And she was interested in partnering with Fort Hayes to be able to do something with the university to have an engaged process. And I said yes again. And I'd heard nothing from either one of those groups from close to 3 weeks ago. So Friday, I just sent notes to both of them, to the people they inquired. I said, hey, October's getting closer, lots of dates and such, because I want to do this. And I got a note from Sarah on Sunday, and she said, I regret that Mr. Mann's staff indicated that because of concerns about votes going on, that he would be unable to participate. Congress is going to be in session or out of session in October, so I didn't understand that one. And the TV folks said pretty much the same thing. So scoop here, you get the inside information. I'm going to give it about another week, and then my press release is going to go out to media across the district and said, hey, Mr. Mann, please, you tell me where, when, and conditions for showing up so we can have a face-to-face discussion, and I will be there. And I don't have really much faith that he will want to sit face-to-face. I don't. So anyway, you asked.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I just want to say that we really appreciate you being here and answering questions and, you know, really being candid about your thoughts on the issues. We will, I think, be able to post a video of this on our YouTube channel. I'll have to run that by somebody who knows a little bit more than me, but I think we can. And I think that's it.
But thank you all for your time this evening. I've enjoyed this very much. I would love the opportunity to sit with you face to face. That's the most fun. But when our distance is so far and we can keep connected here via technology, that's a good day. So I'm grateful for your time. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.